Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Yod Gimel. Today we're going to get to the next part of the Mishnah and the source for how we know that not only get but also death of the husband ends the marriage. But first, we're continuing to talk about consent of the woman in cases where it's not clear that she says something or accepts something. So we have a story. A certain woman, she's selling belts. So she has a little stand in the marketplace selling belts. Some guy comes along and snatches a belt. He steals a belt from her merchandise. She says, give that back to me. He says, if I give it to you, will you be my wife? Will you be mikudeshet to me? Some kind of wise guy. He steals something, and then for her to get it back, well, she has to marry him. So shekalte v'ishtika. She takes it back. She takes the belt, but she didn't say anything. Now, how do we interpret that action? Since he said, be mikudeshet to me with this belt that I will give back to you, and she takes it without saying anything, does that mean she agrees to be married to him? In a normal ceremony, marriage ceremony, he gives her something and she's quiet and we say, okay, so that means she agreed to it. Or not. In this case, this is a stolen item. She just wants her item back. And so she's accepting it because it's hers. She has a right to it back. She doesn't mean, if she said, yes, I agree to it, then okay. But if she doesn't say anything, maybe she just wants her item back. So how do we interpret this action? Rav Nachman says, she can claim, yes, it is I took it because it's mine. And I did not agree to marry this guy, right? He made this condition. Will you marry me if I give it back to you? I just took it back. It doesn't mean I agreed to marry him. It's mine. Good. Now, so that's Rav Nachman's opinion. But now we have a challenge of a similar case with opposite conclusion. Itibed Rav Nachman. Kiddusha begezel ubchamas ubegeneva. O shechataf sela miyada v'kiddusha mekudeshet. We have a braita that says if a man steals something, either by robbery, by theft, by extortion, or he steals some money from her hand, and then he gives it to her and says, will you be mikudeshet to me with this money that I just stole from you? And she accepts it, we say it is mikudeshet. So, how do we reconcile this braita with what Rav Nachman said? And the answer is hatam b'deshadech. Over there in this baraita, this is where it's not a stranger, but rather it's a man and a woman who already know each other and already discussed marriage and she already agreed to marry him, and the parents and everything, they settled everything. So that it's not a surprise. It's true, he did use stolen merchandise. He might have even stolen something from her, but she did take it, and by taking it, since they talked about it and agreed to marriage beforehand, so then it makes sense to interpret her taking it as waiving her right to for that stolen item. She's like, all right, fine, you could keep the stolen item, and I will accept it back from you as Kiddushin, since they know each other and already agreed to marry. That's different from the case over here of Rav Nachman, where it was a complete stranger. It doesn't have to be a complete stranger. It could be the person, but that they were not proposing marriage beforehand. She never agreed to marry him beforehand. He just came and stole a belt and then gave it to her and proposed marriage. She took the belt. That doesn't mean she wants to marry. So you have to look at the context and the prior relationship between these two people to know if accepting back the stolen item means that she's waiving her right to get the stolen item back and she accepts Kiddushin. Makes sense if there was already Shidduchin. Otherwise, not. Good. Now we want to find an extra proof that there is a difference between whether they had previously made an arrangement of marriage or not, from the following Baraita Detanya. Amala kinsi sela zo shani hayav lichi v'chazar v'amala hitkachi li bo bishat matan ma'ot rasta mikudeshet lo rasta ena mikudeshet lachar matan ma'ot afilu rasta ena mikudeshet. The Baraita is somewhat similar to the Mashkon case we saw yesterday. But in this one, a man owes money to a woman. And so he says, here is the $100 that I owe you. I'm paying back the money. After that, he says, you know what? Instead of that being a repayment for the loan, how about I'll make that Kiddushin? Will you be my wife with that payment? So what's the law? Well, it depends. If he says Hidkachili bo at the time that he's giving the money, as giving her the money, then if she accepts it and she's willing, the Kiddushin works. If not, we'll see what these terms mean again, then she is not mikudeshet. But if he already gave her the money, then that's it. He already gave her the money as a repayment for the loan. So she possesses the money as a repayment for the loan. Even if she says, yes, I accept it, it's still not a Kiddushin because he didn't give her anything. That's unlike the case of the Pikadon where he doesn't owe her money. He gave her something that's now not hers, just to watch. And then he says, you know what, let it be yours if you agree to marry. And she says yes. Okay, that is a Kiddushin. That was the case yesterday. Here, he gave it to her to repay the loan. So that's it. Now they're even. So he's not giving her anything. So you can't say that is Kiddushin. This is also different from the stealing case, because in the stealing case, although he's giving her something, well, that's actually going to be the question. How is this different from the stealing case? Okay, so first we have to clarify what exactly is the law, if it's willing or unwilling. What do these terms mean here? Mai rasta umai lo rasta. Ila ma rasta damra'in. Lo rasta damra la. If you say, so this is talking about the case where he gave her the money. First he said, will you be, this is a repayment for the loan. Then he said, you know what, be mikudeshet li, and then gave her the money. So the giving of the money is after he said, be my wife. And so if we, and here the Baraita says, if she agrees, mikudeshet. If she doesn't agree, lo mikudeshet. So if we say that means she said yes, so mikudeshet, and lo dasta means she said no, not mikudeshet. Well, from the last case, we can infer that if she was just quiet, havu kiddushin, there would be kiddushin. Only if she says no, it's not kiddushin. But if she would just say nothing, then it would be mikudeshet. If that's the case, v'nitni mikudeshet stam ki hatam. But then you don't have to say if she's not willing, just say mikudeshet. You don't have to make a distinction between ratzta and lo ratzta. You could just say mikudeshet, and I would know mikudeshet because she says yes or is quiet. And obviously, if she says no, in any case that she says no, she's not mikudeshet. So that can't be the meaning of these words. Ela rasta damra'in lo rasta d'ishtika. Rather, it has to be willing means she said yes. Unwilling means she was quiet. If she's quiet, then it's not a good kiddushin. V'katane ena de'ena mikudeshet. My tama. Why would it not be mikudeshet? This is a case where first he said, this is a repayment. Then he said, be mikudeshet, and then he gave it. So he said, be mikudeshet, then he gave it, and she accepted it and was quiet. So it should be okay, right? Why is it not mikudeshet? The answer is yechola lememar in shakli vedidi shakli, because she could say, I accepted it and I was quiet. It's true because he owes me money, right? So this is in fact the same, very similar to the case of stealing. Guy stole something, and now he's giving it back. She accepts it, and just because she accepts it doesn't mean she's agreeing to marry. She wants her stolen item back. This woman also wants her loan back. Good. So now we established what that case is. But we're going to have a question. Wait a second. The Braita that we just quoted says that in a similar case of something, if the guy steals something or extorts her or is through robbery, or he grabs money from her and then gives it to her as kiddushin, that then she is mikudeshet. But in this, we just established that if she is quiet and doesn't say anything, ena mikudeshet. So you see that there's a contradiction between these two baraitot themselves. So how are we going to answer that? Rather, it's obvious that we have to say the braita of the gezel chamas and geneva, that's when they already arranged marriage. And then he goes and steals something from her, which I guess, I don't know, maybe he's doing it playfully, maybe not. Maybe he just needs some money to do kiddushin. Whatever the reason, maybe it's not a nice thing to do, but nevertheless, if he does it and she accepts it, So she accepts it. I mean, she waives the right to her stolen object, and she accepts it as Kiddushin because they already did Shidduchin. So there's already, the marriage is already agreed to and arranged, so we interpret it as such. Whereas this Braita here that we just mentioned, regarding the loan that is being paid back, and here we explained that it's ena mikudeshet when she just keeps the item and doesn't say anything. That's because there was no arrangement and talk of marriage beforehand. And so we see just from these two baraitot that you have to make a distinction between them, and the most obvious distinction is to say that one is when they had a shidduch, when they didn't have a shidduch, and so once we have that answer, we can use that to explain Rav Nachman as well, when there was no arrangement of marriage beforehand. All right, good. Now, kinach nafsheh de Rabbi Aseh, ailu Rabbanan lenakutinhu lishma tete, amar lehu merabanan v'Rabbi Yaakov shemeh. Okay, now we're going to quote a series of statements in the name of Rabbi Aseh, because when Rabbi Aseh died, the rabbis got together to collect and review all his statements. Now that he died, we want to make sure that we don't forget any of his statements. Right? What a wonderful way to honor a scholar who died, then by making sure to remember all of his teachings. Okay, so one of the rabbis who was there, who was a student of Rabbi Aseh, heard traditions from him. His name was Rabbi Yaakov, and he said as follows: Hachi amar Rabbi Aseh, amar Rabbi Maneh. I heard from Rabbi Aseh who said in the name of Rabbi Maneh, Keshem she'en isha niknet bepachot mishaveh peruta, kach en karka niknet bepachot mishaveh peruta. Just as a woman cannot be acquired in marriage with less than a peruta, so too land cannot be bought with less than a peruta. Amru lo vehatanya, af al pi she'en isha niknet bepachot mishaveh peruta, karka niknet bepachot mishaveh peruta. And so they said back to him, wait, did Rabbi Aseh really say that? Doesn't make sense, because there's a braita. This is the opposite. It says even though a woman cannot be acquired with less than a peruta, land can be acquired with less than a peruta. Amar lehu kitanyahin bechalipin. So Rabbi Yaakov explained that braita is talking about kinyan halipin. If you're using kinyan halipin, which is a symbolic exchange, so the item that you're giving in exchange for what you're receiving can be, let's say, a needle, which is worth less than a peruta. That's okay because it's a symbolic exchange, but the seller, by accepting the needle, can transfer the ownership of the land with that. But if you're using it as money, then no, you can't buy something monetarily with less than a peruta. There is just no currency that's less than it. The Tanya konin bechli afal pi she'en bo shaveh peruta. And here's this braita talking about chalipin that says yes, you can acquire with a vessel even if it doesn't have a shaveh peruta. But Rabbi Aseh is also right that you cannot acquire something with money for an amount that's less than a peruta. Hadariat bi v'ka'amri ha v'hadara amar Rav Yehuda amar Shemuel. Now we're going to quote another statement that Rabbi Aseh said, and it was with regard to something Rav Yehuda in the name of Shemuel taught. Kol she'eno yodea betiv gitin v'kiddushin lo yeheh lo asek imahen. Shemuel said, anyone who doesn't know the details, the nature of gitin and kiddushin should not be involved with them. You should not arrange kiddushin or arrange gitin if you don't really know the halachot, because a lot of bad things can come from it. Amar Rabbi Aseh, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'kashim la'olam yoter midor hamabul. And here's where Rabbi Aseh comes in. He said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that someone who involves himself in Gitin and Kiddushin and doesn't know the halachot is going to cause things to be messed up, and the result is going to be worse than the generation of the flood. שנאמר, עלו וחחש ורסוח וגנוב ונאוף פרסו, ודמים בדמים נגעו. Pasuk in Hosea that says that the people are swearing and lying, killing, stealing, committing adultery. They break all bounds. Blood touches blood. What does that mean? Mai mashma metargem Rav Yosef moldin benin mineshe havrin. What does it mean? Damim bedamim. It means that they had illicit relations. That the problem is that you have a woman who's actually married to some guy, but someone did arranged a get, but didn't know what they were doing, and the get was invalid. And then she's going to go marry a second guy, but really the get was invalid, so she's actually married to the first guy. And so now women are having children men are having children with women that are actually married to other people, adultery, causing mamzerim. So chovin al chovin mosifin, and thereby they're causing sin upon sin. And Dodam Abul, the whole world was full of all kinds of giloy arayot and licentiousness. And here it's rabbis or judges who adjudicate such matters. If they're not doing a good job, then they're causing those very same sins to happen. Uchtiv al ken te'bal haaretz ve'umlal kol yoshev ba bechayat ha'sadeh ubof hashamayim v'gam digeh hayam ye'asefu. Now, how do you know it's worse than Dod HaMabul? Well, because look at the pasuk in Hosea that comes right after. Because of these sins, the land mourns, and everyone who dwells there languishes. The beasts of the field, the fowl of heaven, and the fishes of the sea are also taken away. Metu velo dagim shebayam v'lo hacha afilu dagim shebayam. When during the generation of the flood, although everything on land got wiped out, but the decree was not against the fish. There was a flood, but the fish were fine. All right, it says anything that was on dry land died, but not the fish. Whereas here in Hosea's generation, where you have these all of these sins, even the fish, it says the gehayam ye'asefu. So that's how you could see from this punishment that the sin was actually worse. Now we ask, wait a second, how do you know that they're going to be destroyed for damim bedamim? Maybe they have to commit all of these sins before that punishment comes. No, that can't be, because the pasuk in Yirmiyah says, just because of Allah, one sin of swearing falsely, the land mourns. So you see that just for one sin, and Allah is also mentioned in the Hosea pasuk. So just like for this one sin, the punishment comes, so too we can assume that for each of the other sins separately, and whether you're doing only this or only that, still the world will be deserving of that same punishment. Wait a second. Not necessarily. Maybe swearing falsely is so severe that by itself will bring the punishments, but the other ones, what are less severe, you have to do all of them in order to deserve the punishment. And we say, no, that is not right reading, because miketiv farasu ketiv. There's no vav at the end of that sentence. It doesn't say they did this and this and this, and also they broke all bounds. It says it without a vav. Without a vav means that this stands alone, and just as this stands alone and Allah stands alone, each one is a standalone sin that will bring upon this punishment that even the fish will die. And so you see that a generation where people are not careful regarding Gitin and Kiddushin, not only people, but the experts that are adjudicating Kiddushin, Gitin and Kiddushin, have to make sure that they're doing so very, very carefully, so that they do not cause adultery and mamzerim to proliferate in the world. Haduriat biveka'amre, haditnan, haisha shebi'a chatata umeta, yabi'u yorshin olataha. The sages were sitting and continuing to cite statements in the name of Rabbi Aseh, who had just died, and they wanted to memorialize him and make sure to continue his legacy through his teachings. And they said about the following Mishnah that says a woman who just gave birth. Generally, a woman who gives birth has to bring two korbanot, a korban chatat, which is birds, and a korban olah, which is a sheep. So let's say while she was alive, she brought her birds for chatat, but then she died, and she didn't bring her korban olah. The question is, do her heirs have a requirement to bring the olah on her behalf? So the Mishnah says yes, they have to bring an olah on her behalf. However, there's a machloket. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel v'hu shehifrishata mechayim, aval lo hifrishata mechayim lo. He said that's only if the mother had set aside this sheep for an olah offering while she was alive. Then they have to continue. It's already set aside, so they have to make it a korban. But if she did not set one aside, then they have no monetary obligation to take from this money that they inherited and give it as a sheep. This was her obligation, and so that's it. It's gone. Alma kasaba shibbuda lav deoraita. We can infer that Shemuel holds of the opinion, there's a general machloket about this, whether a monetary obligation turns into a lien on a doraita level. The mother has a monetary obligation to give an olah. It's a ritual obligation as well. And so does her property become liened for that obligation? Is there a lien on it such that the inheritors then who inherit that land have to take from it and pay the amount for the sheep? So it must be not. It's not doraita. That's why they're off the hook. If the woman set it aside already, so it's already hekdesh, okay, then what else are you going to do with it? You have to sacrifice it. But if not, there is no lien on a doraita level. Amar Rabbi Aseh, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Afagav shelo ifrisha mechayim. However, Rabbi Aseh, and said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, here's our Rabbi Aseh. It's important that we remember him because he is the one that quoted in the name of Rabbi Yochanan from Eretz Yisrael, and he said he's machmir. He says even if the mother did not set aside a sheep, nevertheless there is a lien on the property to pay for a sheep, even if she didn't set it aside. Al makasaba shibuda havav deoraita. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan thinks that a lien on there is a lien on a property on a deoraita level if the deceased had owed something. This will apply not only to a korban but also to a monetary obligation if there's a loan out. We're talking about here a loan, an oral loan. If there's a loan with a contract, then everyone agrees certainly that makes a lien on the property. Everyone, that's what they agree to going in. But if it's an oral loan, does that to create a lien on the property such that inheritors would have to pay? That is subject to a machloket that was quoted separately. And we're going to ask, why do we need to quote the same machloket twice? Right, so didn't the same sages, Rabbi Yochanan and Shemuel we just saw, didn't they already argue about this in another teaching? Why do we have to know it twice? Here we have Rav also, but Shemuel, that we already said, if someone makes an oral loan, then and he dies without paying, so the lender cannot take the money from the inheritors. The inheritor says, sorry, right? He's gone. It was his obligation, and there's no lien on the land. Also, if he sells his land to other buyers, so again, the lender cannot go to those other buyers and say, oh, you have to give me that land because I had a prior lien. No, there is no lien on it, according to Shemuel. Now we learn that Resh Lakish also, right? So this is the early Amoraim from Bavel versus the early Amoraim from Eretz Yisrael. They both say that an oral loan one can collect both from inheritors and from buyers of that land. So that means that there is on the Doraita level a lien that's taken out on land, even if it's oral. So we see that these two line up. Now we would say this is good that they line up. We have two traditions that say the same thing, but we want to know. Well, this is repetitive. Why do we have to remember both? Siricha. Each one teaches us something important. Diitmar beha behach ka'amar Shemuel mishum dela milve kituba batorah hi. If I only had this case of loans, the second one, so I would say here Shemuel is lenient and it does not create a loan because this is not a loan that's written in the Torah. Whereas the mother who has to give a korban from the Torah is a Torah obligation to give a korban, I might say perhaps Shemuel would agree that there a lien is created and the inheritors have to pay from that land for a sheep. That's why we need the first statement that Shemuel is lenient even in that case and it does not create a lien. Aval be'ahach ema modeh lehu Rabbi Yochanan leShakish. I might have thought that regarding the burnt offering that they would agree, Shemuel would agree with Rabbi Yochanan because Doraita, so that's why I need the first one to teach us that they don't. V'yashminan beha, and if I only had the first one regarding the mother, beha ka'amar Rabbi Yochanan demilveh ketubah b'Torah ketubah b'shtar damya. I might say that's where Rabbi Yochanan thinks that a lien is created because this is an obligation that's written in the Torah, and so if it's written in the Torah, there's nothing more written than something written in the Torah. So that's like a loan that's written in a document, and that's why it creates a lien. But in an oral loan, The second one, I might think that Rabbi Yochanan would agree with Shemuel that no lien is created. So that's why I need the second statement to teach me that Rabbi Yochanan thinks a lien is created, even if it's just an oral loan. So now we understand why we need both. Bottom line, Amar Papa Hilchata Milveh al Peh Goveh Min HaYorshin Ve'eno Goveh Min HaLakochot. And the halakha is we're going to split the difference and say that an oral loan, if the guy who owes the money dies, so his inheritors do have to pay from the land that they inherited. However, if the guy is alive and he sold it to someone else, the buyers of that land do not have to give up the land to pay for the loan. What's the difference? Well, we're deciding that there is a lien on a deoraita level, like Rabbi Yochanan said, and that's why there's the lien. There is a lien on the land, and that gets inherited, and therefore the heirs have to pay the money back from the land that has a lien on it. So that makes sense. However, buyers, even though on the doraita level there would be a lien on the land, however, this is going to be a problem if every time you have an oral loan, if that every time there's an oral creates a lien on land, then every time someone buys land, he never knows, well, maybe there's a lien on this land, right? Who knows how many oral loans there are out there? And people aren't going to want to buy land because they're going to pay for it, and then someone's going to say, oh, I made an oral loan, now you have to go and give up your land to pay for it. So that's not going to be good for the economy. Whereas if it's in a written document, that's okay because that has publicity. When something is written in a document, and the signatures, and it goes to court, so then you can go and check. You can do a deed search, a title search, to make sure that there's no liens on the land, or if there is a lien, then you'll know about it, and so you can figure that into the transaction, into the price, and decide if you want to do it or not. So then that's fine. If it's public, that's okay. The problem with oral loans is that there's no documentation, and so it is not public, and there's no way to know whether there's a lien on the land. So therefore, the rabbi said, in order for the economy to run to function smoothly, even though on the doraita level there is a lien on the land, the rabbi said we're only going to apply that lien if it's a written document. If it's oral, then that's it. We say sorry. If you wanted to collect from the land, then you should have written it down. Otherwise, we're going to give a right to buyers to be able to keep the land that they bought. Good. Now we get to the next subject. V'konat asma beget ubemitat haba'al. The Mishnah, we talked about how you enter into marriage, you exit marriage through get, or if the husband dies. That's how a woman can acquire herself. The marriage ends also when she dies, but she acquires her freedom to remarry if the husband dies. Bishlama get ichtiv v'katav la sefer kiritut. Get, all right, we saw a whole Masechet Gitin, explicit pasuk. He has to write her a document of severance and give it to her, and then she can go and marry another. So that's clear. Elamitata ba'al min elan. But what's a source that husband dying means that the marriage is ended and that she can go and marry another, right? Maybe she remains prohibited, and that's it. Once married to one man, she is never allowed to marry anybody else, even if the husband died, right? We might think that. Sevarahu hu asara vehu shadeta. So our first answer is it's just logical. The husband, he's the one, by marrying her, made her prohibited to everyone, and if he's not around anymore, then she's permitted to everyone. It's his existence that makes his existence as a husband that makes her prohibited. If it doesn't exist, then she's allowed to marry whoever she wants. But we say, no, that's not exactly true. Regarding close relations of the husband, the wife is also prohibited to. For example, her father-in-law. Even if the husband dies, she's not allowed to marry her father-in-law ever. So it's true that by marrying her, by getting married, that created a prohibition. But by him dying, that doesn't release the prohibition. So that's not true that every time, just because he's dead, all prohibitions are released. So here's the second source. We can learn it by inference from the law of Yibum. The Torah says that if the husband dies without children, then the Yevama is prohibited to marry anybody else except for the Yavam. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means if they have children, then she's permitted to marry everybody else. So that's an inference from the opposite, but it seems like a good inference. Right? If there's no children, then she has to marry the Yavam and no one else. So it means if there are children, she is allowed to marry everybody else, right? No, maybe not necessarily. Maybe if there's no children, then she has to do yibum. She's prohibited to everybody, but she's permitted only to the yavam. But maybe if there are children, then she's prohibited to everyone. You can build a logical argument that way. Basically, marriage is forever, and once a woman gets married, she can never marry anybody else. The thing is, if the husband dies without children, then to uphold his name, so the brother kind of acts as a surrogate. And the child is considered in the name of the deceased. So it's really not like marrying an outsider. It's just the brother is kind of stepping in for his deceased brother. And that's why it's only allowed in that case in order to have a child, but otherwise it's prohibited. So that's not a proof either. Third attempt. The Torah says a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a widow. If he's not allowed to marry a widow, that means a different Kohen, a regular Kohen, is permitted. Otherwise, right, if all widows were prohibited from marrying anyone, then you'd say everybody is prohibited from marrying a widow. Why do you have to specify and say Kohen Gadol is prohibited from marrying a widow? That means other people can marry widows. Isn't that a good proof that after death, a woman is permitted to marry? Not necessarily. Maybe it's prohibited to everybody. Just for a Kohen Gadol, it's prohibited by Isur Lav. That is the prohibition of a widow to marry a Kohen Gadol. And for everybody else, it's prohibited with a Misvat Aseh. Misvat Aseh is less severe than a Lav, but it's still a prohibition. I mean, you're lacking doing a positive mitzvah by violating it. So maybe it's actually prohibited to everybody. The Torah is letting you know. Listen, to a Kohen Gadol, that's a special prohibition of a lav. For everybody else, it's a violation of a mitzvat aseh. So we ask, Hai aseh, my abidete. What would be the purpose of this mitzvat aseh? How does it work? Ida hanya mitata baal tishtere legamre. Ida la hanya mitata baal tokma. If the death of the husband does something, so when the husband is alive, that's a serious prohibition. It's by death penalty, adultery, if she would be with someone else. So if the death of the husband changes things, so then it should take that away, and now she should be permitted totally. And if the death of the husband does not change anything, then she should remain in the same initial state, and anyone, if she goes and is with anybody, it should continue to be the death penalty. In other words, either something changes or it doesn't change. Where do we ever find where that something is prohibited in one way, and then when something changes, it's still prohibited but in a different way, right? That while she's married, it's prohibited as a death penalty to be with anybody else. The death of her husband changes that, so undoes that, but then a different obligation sets in that she has to remain, the misvat aseh, to remain single, right? Do we ever find such a model? And we say, yes, in fact, we do. Alama lo, apikte mimita ve'okimta al aseh, midi dehava pesule hamukdashim. Maybe, in fact, the death of the husband removes the death penalty and turns it into a violation of a mitzvat aseh, just like we find regarding muktashim, a sanctified animal, that becomes disqualified. What's the law there? When it's a sanctified, unblemished animal that you can use as a sacrifice, if someone would take it and benefit on their own, there would be chayav me'ilah, very serious sin. And also, a sanctified animal, you cannot shear it or make it perform labor. Perakinhu me'ila letbehu begizav avodah asiri. But if that animal should become blemished, and then you'd have to redeem it, once you redeem it, so then there is no me'ila. You're allowed to use that, and you're allowed to take that animal and benefit from its skin and its meat, even though you're still prohibited from shearing and from doing labor with it. So here is an example of something that is a serious prohibition, and when something changes, it gets a blemish and is redeemed, so then the serious prohibition is removed, although some prohibition still remains. So it is possible for a change to not change it entirely, but not be the same as it was before, but go from something serious to something less serious. So we do have an example precisely of that, and therefore we reject that proof. So now we try yet another proof. The pasuk says that if a person just got married, so he's exempt from war, because if they just got married and didn't yet get to live with his wife, and then he should go out to war and die. So rather, if he got engaged, he did Kiddushin with a woman and didn't yet consummate the marriage, and he goes out to war and dies, someone else will come and take his bride. And this is very sad, right? This is a great milestone, and the Torah wants to emphasize the value of life and the happy things in life, and not glorify war. So therefore, this person is exempt. But we can learn from this that if a person who is married, Kiddushin, Nisuin, doesn't matter, goes off and dies, that another person can come and marry her. So here you go. From here we can prove that Mita will undo Kiddushin. Isn't that a good proof? No, matkif la Rav Shisha bered Rav Idi emaman acher yavam. Maybe when it says ish acher yikachena, it's not talking about anybody, but rather the yavam. If he dies without children, well, probably they just got married, so they didn't have children yet, and he'll say he doesn't have children from a previous marriage, and so he goes out to war and dies. Then the surviving brother will have an obligation to do yibum. So the ish acher who takes her is not any other person, but only the yavam, and maybe she's actually still prohibited to marry anybody else. So no proof. But finally we say, I have two responses to that. Chada, the yavam la ikri acher. First of all, you wouldn't call a yavam another person. Another acher means a different person, right? Someone unrelated, a stranger, anybody. If it was talking about the brother, you would say, right, that yevamaha yikachena. And so that pasuk doesn't sound like that. And furthermore, he has another proof. Ve'od ketib usne'ah ha'isha acharon ve'katav la'sefer kiritut o ki yamut ha'isha acharon. In the main source that where we learn get is talking about a case of machazir gerushato, when man A marries a woman and then he doesn't like her anymore and gives her a get, and then she marries a second guy, and the second guy, who's called ha'isha haron, if he either gives her a get or he dies, so you see, and then she goes back and tries to marry the first, it's not good. She's not allowed to go back and marry the first. What do you see in this pasuk? That giving a get is equivalent to the second husband dying. Itkash mita legerushin, ma gerushin sharia vegomeret, af mita sharia vegomeret. So we compare them, and just like a get completely finishes off the divorce, and she's completely severed, that marriage is completely severed, she can marry anyone she wants, so too the death of the husband permits her to everyone, completely, totally severing the marriage. Is true in terms, there are some remnants in terms of the arayot, that she is not allowed to marry his close relatives. That's true, but she is permitted to marry everybody else, and so until death do us part. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.